Guys, so here is the article. So, cheering for optimism and the internet. Two of the probably biggest topics of Gary Vees' personality and persona. So, this is a really good post. It was just published about a month ago. And yeah, it's really kind of going into the foundation of who he is, which is that you have more opportunity than ever, literally, right? Because he loves using that word because he knows his audience. But that you have more opportunity than ever. You have limitless alternatives. Positivity wins, right? So basically his core messages. And so this article is a very good representation of who he is. So I would definitely recommend just checking this article out by itself. And it's different checking it on the website, so you can get the whole feel for it and get all the full experience. But for this, I copy and pasted it over to Google Docs. Much easier for me to make my comments. So as I said before, I'm just going to go through this and point out some of the things, some of the tactics and things that I see that he's using as a copywriter to really build that engagement, build momentum, and get the person reading this to start to really trust him if they don't already. And keep in mind, this is Gary Vee, so like he knows his stuff is really well put together. So there's no way in the world he would probably ask me for feedback. But if he did, this is what I would tell him. So he really goes with his story in the beginning. So the hook is obviously very important. And then just actually, let's go back. So starting with the headline, cheering for optimism and the internet. So this really sets the bar. It sets the tone, right? This is going to be a motivational, aspirational piece. Emotional triggers are very, very important. And being aspirational is one of the most powerful triggers. So he's using it right away. Cheering for optimism and the internet. So now you kind of have an idea of what to expect. And he uses that momentum and starts off with a very strong hook that says, look, I know I'm successful, but due to my circumstances, I could have complained, but I became rooted in a foundation of gratitude and a level of perspective that changed my life, right? So this is a lot of, like I said, his whole core message is that regardless of your upbringing or your situation, you still have so many opportunities. So he's setting that up in the hook right away. So in my comments, I would say, obviously, great hook, because that is something that they can easily identify with, not only in their personal life, but with Gary Vee himself. And his whole thing is being relatable, even though he is, 78. So he's like almost 40 years old, or he is 40 years old. He's still relatable to people as young as, 13, 14, because of the way he speaks. And he created an audience so that it goes really from age 13 to like 50. It's because he's just very real and he's very energetic. And so this obviously wouldn't be somebody's first introduction to Gary Vee, but it's very important that he revisits the main things that people know about him. So you might know about Gary Vee in his story, but he says it again. Due to my circumstances and the reality that I immigrated to the U.S. in 1978. So just restating that and just bringing that emotion back into the present is a very good tactic, because that gets them eased in and ready to kind of, read the rest of it. Because it's like, oh yeah, this is why I like this guy. This was his deal. So, all right, let me see what he has to say. So this hook does that. So now just moving down. And then he ends this intro with the kind of the teaser for the rest of the article. One of the best and most important things to do in your writing is when you have an intro, obviously you have your hook, but at the end of your intro, you need to set up the rest of it. Again, this whole thing is momentum. So setting it up in the last sentence or two of your intro will, set the momentum and kind of keep them pushing down into the actual meat of your content. And this is where you're going to kind of make your statement. Everything you write needs to have an opinion. You should not just kind of throw out an idea and then not take a side on it. The whole reason people want to listen to you or tune into you is because you have an opinion and they want to hear what your opinion is so they can form their own. So here he says, to kind of summarize his idea, many of us are complaining and we don't realize that this is the single greatest era to be alive in human history. It's almost a non-debate, right? And it's a non-debate. So he's not kind of half-stepping. He's saying, this is it for real, for real. So after that big statement, this is where he's really good. He's really smart because he's made pretty big statements, very he doesn't really give a shit. That's his whole thing, right? He doesn't care because he's just going to say it how he feels. But he backs it up. So right away, he backs it up. Like, look at this paragraph. thick with stats, because he knows his audience. He knows his audience. They don't take us, like the millennials, the whatever, the people that are online. We don't take statements and as fact anymore. If we hear something, we're like, okay, show me, prove it. So he knows that. And since he just made a big statement, he knows that he needs to back it up. So in this first paragraph, look, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 statistics, 5 resources that back up whatever he's saying. So immediately by doing this, by proving and giving, giving substance to what he's saying, then you automatically trust him. And now this is like genius, because now that he's already solidified himself as a fact teller, now he can just basically say whatever he wants, because it's like, okay, all this is true. So now it's like, all right, I guess what he's saying is right. He has no reason to mislead me. So that's a genius tactic by him, is setting this up with the intro, with a big, powerful statement, and then backing it up with a bunch of statistics. Really good for you if you have if you're running an expert business or something like that, where you're making these statements to stand out. If you can back it up right away, then people will listen to you and want to read the rest. So moving on. So this whole piece, like I said, is the foundation of Gary Vees. So throughout it, it really has very, very Gary Vee moments. If you've seen him, you know how crazy and like energetic and just wild he is. So he uses that in his writing. Like, look at this. So he says, "Trust me, I am enormously empathetic to the strifes and struggles that are happening all over." If anyone else said something like this, if anyone said that they were enormously empathetic, you would roll your eyes, like you would double roll them if you could. But this is Gary Vee, right? He talks like this all the time. He's very, black and white. He just say plainly what he feels. He says, "Trust me, I am enormously empathetic." You can't say that unless you have some clout, which Gary Vee has a lot of clout. So just keep in mind, you can't, if you're talking to your audience and you haven't yet created that sort of relationship or that sort of status for yourself, watch the statements and the words that you use. If you try to come off as too much of a boss that really hasn't proved anything yet, then they're just not really going to take you seriously. But Gary Vee has already established himself, so he can pretty much say things like, "I am enormously empathetic," right? Stuff like that. And then, so one of the things that I do that I like to recommend, just like in the body and in writing in general, is to break things up, break up text, break up big paragraphs. Gary Vee does not do a lot of that. In some of his blog posts, in many of his blog posts, actually, he does. He uses what I like to call broetry, which is very, very short paragraphs, because it's easy to highlight certain ideas. But in this one, he does not. He went with the more dense paragraphs, and it could be because he's done some testing and seen it from that his audience likes the more traditional writing. But me, when I was reading it, I felt like it would benefit from some new paragraphs. So this is kind of what I would do if I was giving him some advice, would be just to break it up. So if you read it, as you read this article, either on the website or on this this Google Doc, which I can send you if you want, you can see the spots where he needs to kind of break up different ideas and just make it a little bit easier to highlight the big blanket statements that are important to keep the momentum moving. So like statements like this, if you have a big statement like this, you probably want to highlight it and put it in its own paragraph. But Gary Vee's done a very good job in this. Even with the dense paragraphs, he does a very good job of just keeping the ideas moving and not using any filler words. So, and I don't know who his editor is. I'm sure Gary Vee has an amazing editor, but what is really powerful about his content is that there's no wasted words, right? Everything just keeps moving with strong ideas. So this first kind of section of the content, you literally have more opportunity than ever, and he's great, and he's given us these stats. So now we trust him. He's made some pretty big statements here that back up his stats. So this whole first kind of content section is really to make himself credible. Now he has the power and the opportunity to make statements, kind of like the call to action. So it's shifting now from presenting the idea, proving the idea, and now it's the so what, right? So the next steps. This is kind of where it's going to shift to action. It's going to shift to you, the reader. And as you can see, he takes advantage by saying, you have limitless alternatives, don't complain. So he's saying, don't complain because of all these things that I just said, right? And then he backs it up. Most of your grandparents would probably struggle to have 500 people listen to their opinion. And now we complain about having only 10,000 views or 10,000 followers online. The distribution and disruption that the internet has enabled is insane, right? So he's making statements that that backs up his core messaging. Again, if it was me and I was writing this, I would probably separate some of these more powerful sentences so they could stand out and it'd be just easier for the reader to scan. But more, I'm thinking about it more. I think he's doing it this way because at this point his audience is so tuned in. He doesn't really need to use tactics like that where you need to highlight certain paragraphs. Because if you know Gary Vee and you're reading this, you're probably reading every single word. So now, and then what he really does also well is take it into action steps. So he doesn't just make this all theory. He doesn't just go rah, rah, rah. He really takes it into, all right, this is the deal and this is how you can take advantage of the situation. So he's saying now anyone with access has a legitimate alternative. So he's sparking the idea. Not only does he tell you what to do, but he kind of leaves it open to your own interpretation. So he kind of inspires you to think about it in your own personal life. Now anyone with access has alternatives. They can consume it, things like this. And then he does a perfect job of using graphics to break up the text. Because at this point, it's been a lot of dense, valuable content. But, no matter what you're reading, there comes a point where you need like a mental break. And he knows that. So he broke it up with a graphic from his Instagram that supports his ideas. All right. So this is a really good tactic for you also. If you feel like on a read through that it's just like a lot of words, it's kind of mentally taxing, break it up with an image, right? Almost every industry, every person, every piece of content can use an image, and it is welcomed by readers. So use that to break up any dense pieces. And then it's almost like a reset. Adding this image is like a reset. So then he knows since you're reset, it's time you can kind of build that credibility up again. So it's almost like a cycle. You present the idea, you make it credible, either with statistics or testimonials or social proof, things like that. And then you support those stats with your opinion. You give your call to action, you give your view. And that's what he did in this first section. And then he used an image because we were tired. Our brain was kind of taxed. So he added an image and now he's doing it again. So bam, stats, credible. And then he says, if you don't have capital, you can literally go to Craigslist, right? So then he's taking it again to the action. He knows that after his original idea has been planted, right? Now it's just about building on that and supporting that. So he's just building on that idea that you have unlimited opportunity. So again, the biggest thing of my feedback to him would be to break up his paragraphs and highlight the more powerful sentences. Something like this, if you don't have the gratitude and perspective to appreciate that, then you're not in the right headspace to win, right? That's a whopper of a sentence. And if it was me, I would bold it, make it 6 pixels bigger, So those type of sentences are the ones that you really want to highlight themselves. And they'll really get that momentum going. And then he has more content that he plugs in here because it just makes sense for what he's saying. So adding more images or videos is a good way to break up the dense content. And then the rest is more of the same, honestly. He's really kind of, after this first section, honestly. So Gary Vee's stuff is unique because he's very good at getting his point across right away because you already know his point. So a lot of it then is just after the call to actions, it's a lot of personal stories. So he uses personal stories really well. Empathy is probably one of the most powerful emotions. If you can get the reader to not only relate to you, but like feel for you, like, oh, damn, like, you know what I mean? And he does that really well. And he uses it in a present, like very modern way. He's always talking about Wi-Fi and Uber and his iPhones, things like that. And it's because he knows his audience, and the language that he uses, he's very casual, not casual, but it's almost like you can hear him saying this stuff. It's freaking Wi-Fi, right? You can hear his little voice just yelling this. It's freaking Wi-Fi. And that's the whole thing with Gary Vee is that his content, when you read it, it sounds exactly like you would expect. And that's the biggest takeaway is that your writing should follow exactly how you are in real life. Not exactly, but when somebody meets you and they have this idea of you in their head, when they go and read your content, it should match up. And that's what it does. And I think that's why his content is so powerful. And that's why it boosts his brand so well. And yeah, so, he goes in with the same thing kind of again. Just this whole paragraph is another really dense one about a personal experience. Because a personal experience can, it makes you vulnerable, kind of makes you grounded to the reader instead of just feeling like you're being preached at. Now it's like he's letting you into his life. So that's what this whole paragraph does. It tells a personal story about how he struggles with the problem that he's helping you solve. So by doing that, he makes himself just more human and much more relatable. Breaks it up. Positivity always wins. He has so much content that fits perfectly with everything he writes. And then the ending call to action, this is a big one. So he's got you already. At this point, Gary Vee knows when he's got you. Gary Vee's editors know when he has you. So he can give you things like this with a call to action. If you have 2 hours and want to understand my exact POV, give it a go. I can imagine his click-through for this last call to action is insane because he has built up such a big wave of momentum and credibility and trust within this whole blog article. And then obviously within his whole scope of content and who he is and all the things that he does. But even just within this one article, he's done a lot because he has stated his case, backed it up with facts, given you call to actions and action items, and then just reiterated everything with personal stories and emotions. So that in a nutshell is an example of a very, very well-written, persuasive, and credible piece of content. Obviously, Gary Vee is the top of the top, but you should really shoot for these same ideas. Even if you haven't done these things and you're just starting off with your audience, take that in mind. Be very genuine, right? Don't try to act like you've made it if you haven't. Gary Vee can say some of these things because he has made it. But if you want to speak directly to your audience, be very, very transparent with your, where you are, how you're doing, and what you're looking to accomplish. So take some of these tips. Remember, just use these personal stories and highlight the things that you really want your audience to remember. And if you have any other questions about how to make your writing stick, how to make it momentous, how to kind of keep your reader going all the way down, get in touch. I'd be happy to help. And yeah, thanks for watching. Check out more Gary Vee stuff if you want. Check out my stuff if you want. It's all good stuff. Yeah, go write something. Cheers.